In an era when streaming services are just absolutely bountiful and plentiful, it takes a truly special television show to stand out. Now, from 2011 to 2019, many people feel that Game of Thrones was indeed that destination type of programming that you came to talk to everybody about. Water cooler conversations, I had plenty of them. Texting after each episode, it always happened. And when the series ended in 2019, which I understand there's some polarizing thoughts on that, we always wondered what could follow this up, what could follow the legacy. Well, we are here in 2022, and the first season of House of the Dragon has come to an end. Did it live up? Is it just as good? Is it worse? How do we feel about it? Now, I will let everybody know that this will be a spoiler-heavy type of chat, but if we live in an era where you're scrolling through social media anyway and spoilers happen all the time, I find I get really choked when I hear about spoilers on social media, only to watch the actual show and realize I completely forgot about the spoiler. So that's I guess that's why we're here to talk today. You know, opinions being what they are, I want to know what people think. And the three guests that I have waiting backstage are just as eager as I am to have this conversation. And with that, hi, once again, everyone. My name's Ken, and this is a Toy Connections online live stream, or TKO, broadcasting to you, whatever house you happen to support in House of the Dragon. So anyway, let's bring our guests on. I'll stop babbling for a second. So this first individual I met over on the Geek Dad Life Patreon and Discord server. You know what? She was over at San Diego Comic-Con recently, and I scrolled through her feed, told her I really enjoyed I enjoyed what she enjoyed, just being there. And we eventually got into talking, found out she was into some of the same television shows and pop culture genres that I'm into. So welcome for the first time to TKO, Kayla Silva.
Hello. Let's talk about some hot D. How's it going?
Oh my goodness. I never thought about calling it hot D before. Like, since when? All right, now I can't unhear or unsee that.
No, you won't be able to.
And I understand you're house sitting today, so
yes. So if you see a little dog running around, that is why.
That's totally okay. We've seen a few of those on streams like this. So, yeah. All right. And the next individual, actually, we also met on the Geek Dad Life Patreon and Discord server, but he's also the newest patron to the Toy Connections Patreon, and he's got his own YouTube channel. He absolutely loves many things pop culture. We've talked things like Mythic Legions up here. He's very much into Lego, more into Lego than I am, but I found out recently he's also into the Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon universe. Sergio from Brick Something, welcome to TKO.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? Yes, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragons, a.k.a. Got Hot D? Question mark.
Mm-hmm.
Got Hot D. Oh, my goodness.
You just added on to that. I love it.
I don't know if you two are making this up on the fly or whether or not this is actually a thing that's going on.
That was totally made up.
All right. Well, it started here, right? So we'll just have to fight over the trademark when it goes viral. I'll be like, you said it, but you said it on this show. We'll split the royalties. We won't go greens versus blacks and have dragons fighting. But if we do, I call dibs on Vhagar. So, all right.
Can I just take all the rest together?
I just took a baby dragon, but yeah.
Get an egg. Yeah. All right. And finally, we have returning to TKO. And it's interesting because I always said that she comes from wrestling royalty, being the daughter of Sergeant Slaughter. But we have never talked wrestling or G.I. Joe on this channel. We've only ever talked medieval fantasy type of stuff, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, whatever it happens to be. She streamed all evening and afternoon last night, but she's back for more. Kelly Remus, how are you today?
Yeah. I'm good. I'm happy to be here. Talk about Hot D. Love talking about Hot D.
Don't we
Man,
all?
this is awesome. Like the stream just went to another level, and I'm so completely stoked, right? And it took until you came on camera and said Hot D for I've heard it the fourth time now on the stream, not counting when I say it. I didn't even think what the D would have stood for. I was so laser focused on getting the stream going, and now I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things the D could stand for. So, all right, all right. I think we're here to talk. I think we're here to talk about some TV show.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's do it.
Let's talk TV.
I know it's not a
So-
debate, but does anybody have any opening arguments? Because this is such a divisive cast of characters we have on this show. Not this show, but House of the Dragon, Hot D show.
Yeah.
It was a
No?
little slow for me in the beginning. It was hard for me to get into, and I stuck with it because I'm like, this is Game of Thrones. I mean, I have to watch this. But that's really
But also,
plain.
Game of Thrones started pretty slow too. Like even slower. Like this had crazy time jumps, and you had like an episode to pretty much figure out who some of the characters are. So I don't know. I kind of missed that like slow burn that Game of Thrones had initially, but I think if they started House of the Dragon the same way, people wouldn't have liked it as much, because I mean by the end of Game of Thrones it was like rapid fire.
Yes.
Yeah, I got similar thoughts in terms of the slowness of it, and kind of really just I found myself kind of pushing to stay with it because again it was Game of Thrones, and maybe get into this later, but there's a lot of other things out there right now vying for our geeky attention. And so I found myself watching this along with some other shows at the same time and kind of struggling to go back to it a little bit in the beginning. And I think, and then all of a sudden the time jumps happened, and then it was almost the opposite. It was kind of like, wait, I wanted to know this, and what happened to this? So
How did they get from there to here?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I have a lot of the same thoughts that you folks do, but we're here to hear your thoughts first. And I can ramble on all day, so I'm gonna say a quick hello to the chat, and we'll jump into our core discussion. Who happens to be here? Nick Dillinger is here. We got OMZ Music, Ryan Sweeney, Lucha Johnny, Kayla, Silva, and Brick Something, because they both knew that I was a bit paranoid that this is not a toy stream, and I thought that the entire Toy Connections subscription feed would just ghost me, and we would just be here. We may as well do an offline discussion. But no, that did not happen today. I think they want to see you folks. They know I talk about toys enough, but they're like, let's let this guy shut up for a little bit, and let's hear some other people talk about TV, even though this guy is still talking and hasn't moved on from the chat. Okay, let's move on. Highly Articulated, who was on just recently. He said he's not a fan of Hot D, but he enjoys this panel. So there we go. We got Turbo Toys, Ostradamus. We got Jim Largo, Dale Santaford. I think I said hi to Lucha Johnny already. I think I've said hi to just about everybody on here. Nolan. Hopefully I didn't miss anyone. And we got James Ratface44, who just did a recent unboxing of Serpentor from Hasbro Pulse. So say hello to or give his channel a look. And just so you know, the other channels here, like Brick Something and Slaughter Daughters channels, are both in the description below. Kayla Silva, you can follow her on Instagram. That link is in the description as well. So while I'm shouting out James, I figure I may as well shout out the rest of you. Sorry, what was that, Kayla?
I said you don't have to. It's just
okay.
there.
It's too late already. We've got Valerie Francisco. We've got my buddy Shane Broders from Calgary over there. We got Charlie Weaver and someone saying Cobra la 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 la.
That'd be me, Ken.
Yeah, because I'm not a fan of Cobra La, and maybe he knows that, but maybe he doesn't. So. Okay. All right. Cool. Yeah. Just trying to think of what we haven't seen in House of the Dragon yet. The Night's Watch. That's what we haven't seen. When you said it started off slow, I was like, but the opening scene was beyond the wall and was really scary, and then it slowed to a crawl. And the only thing that kept me going was seeing that, oh, Boromir from freaking Lord of the Rings is in this show.
Yes.
So then that kept me going.
He died.
And then he died. Yeah. Oh, by the way,
he
spoiler
always
alert.
does.
Like he always
in
does.
every show and movie that Sean Bean is in, he always dies.
The ironic thing is he didn't die in Troy. He got to be Odysseus in Troy.
Oh my God, that's right. He was in Troy.
So he didn't die in that one, right? So anyway, so let's do a quick roundtable, or a very slow roundtable, however you all want to execute this. How does House of the Dragon hold up compared to the Game of Thrones legacy? All right. I was going to go clockwise, but I see some cringing, and one person kept a stoic wrestling face on here. So we're going to go counterclockwise. Kelly, over to you. We're going to break the cycle.
Okay. Well, I love it. I love the show. I'm glad I stuck with it. I think it's got a lot of really good potential there. Game of Thrones, though, for me was like, I mean, that's like my number one show. I've watched that show on repeat. I can't even tell you how many times I watched that show. And I also read the books. I know everybody always says if they read the books, they'll let you know. Well, I read the books. So to me, even though people say like the beginning of Game of Thrones was slow, for me, it was not slow. I'm like, the first episode was almost the entire first book, you know?
Yeah.
So, but House of the Dragon, I mean, it was slow in the beginning, like I said, but I'm glad I stuck with it because I love it. And now they left us on that cliffhanger, and I'm like, whoa, how long do we have to wait for the next season?
Yeah.
So it holds up for you. I guess it's up there for you.
It holds up to it. I mean, obviously Game of Thrones is up here, and like maybe House Dragon might be down here a little, maybe not quite on the same level, but I mean, we've got dragons, a lot of dragons this time. We only had 3 in Game of Thrones, and now we've got a lot more and more to come that we haven't even seen yet.
It's all kind of one show, and it's all kind of one universe, though, right? Because so someone says, "What's your favorite show?"
Yeah.
It's easier to say it's Game of Thrones because House of the Dragon counts as part of it because you got the same settings. The Red Keep is there. The Iron Throne is there. You know, it's still Westeros. So, Brick, what do you think?
You know, Ken, I think the way you just sort of framed it, that it's sort of one show, that's how I think I need to approach it because it's really tough to compare. You know, Game of Thrones was such a phenomenon for folks. I remember I'm here in the West Coast in San Francisco area, and I remember going to a WonderCon, and they were kind of doing this big push for it. The show was about to come out, and they had the throne there. You could sit on it, take pictures. And I am not the book reader, so shame. But shame.
No shame.
But you know, I was intrigued by the aesthetic. You know, here's this Throne of Swords. What's this about? And they kept pushing that winter is coming. So that was kind of this thing, right? And so they set up that show in a way, almost, you know, with this teaser, winter is coming, and the show opens with that. And so when we got to this show, at first I wanted to compare, and I had to stop myself because it's really different. I have to look at this show in the context of the broader A Song of Ice and Fire, which I'm super happy. I was super happy when they mentioned that. When that moment happened in the show, and you sort of hear this prophecy told, for me, something clicked. And it wasn't just like, oh, yeah, I remember that, like member berries, but it was kind of like, oh, if the larger thing is about this Game of Thrones, of people trying to take the crown and rule Westeros, what that prophecy sort of set up was a reason for the Targaryen family, at least those with that knowledge, to hang on to the throne that isn't purely about power, right? It was, sorry, and this is getting deep, but just this notion of, no, they were trying to get people together to theoretically protect against this enemy. And I really appreciated that because it actually filled in a lot of blanks for me as I'm watching this king. I was like, what is this guy doing? Like decision after decision. And then eventually it was also, you sort of see this question of who's going to control the throne. And it was like, why are these people in power? Like, what are they doing? And then I remember, wait, there's this larger picture that they are aware of, that they're trying to hold on to, but then it all falls apart. So at the end of the day, I can't separate them. I'm kind of into this larger narrative that's happening. But if I had to, I wouldn't quite say Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings to The Hobbit, but I would definitely personally put House of the Dragon a little bit below Game of Thrones. For now, it's super early. Like, I'm not a fan of when people go scorched earth on things that show up. It's new, so I'm in it. Yeah.
Okay. No. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Has
anyone got feedback?
I'm
hearing like static.
I'm hearing static as well.
Could be the heater.
Could be the heater. Okay, that's fine. You know what, Kayla? talk over the heater and
Okay.
either add or go against whatever Serge.
Of course,
and
it
Kelly
just
said.
went on.
That's all good.
I liked you mentioning the overall theme of the Song of Ice and Fire and that prophecy. I think that was really, I kind of like, remember it here and there throughout House of the Dragon, but you kind of forget about it because I felt like I just got completely lost in it compared to
It's all good.
Game of Thrones. Sorry, I'm gonna take him outside.
It's okay. Just roll
I'll
with
be
it.
right back.
Roll with it. I'll vamp for you while you're yeah. Okay. Well,
those dragons, they're demanding.
That's it's all good. It's all good. In the meantime, are we House Green or are we House Black on this one? Who wants to go first? Kelly, House Green or House Black?
I mean, Rhaenyra.
You were a Daenerys person, so I had a feeling you were going to go Rhaenyra.
I was. Now, I mean, she has her faults, but to me, she's the rightful heir to the throne. And Alicent has her dad in her ear. And I feel like he kind of overrides her morals a little bit. Like the way she really feels, because that's her friend and they were friends and they were close. So I think she wants what's best for everyone, but then she's got her dad, the Hand, in her ear being like, no, your son is the heir to the throne and he needs to be on the throne.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well,
Brick, greens with Alicent or blacks with Rhaenyra?
Blizzak, black. And I actually think that might be a little bit of where I'm struggling with the show, because I wish they had set it up for the audience to kind of have a hard time choosing. But I actually think the way that it's been, the narrative's kind of been laid out, it leans really black to me. And yeah, I'm with Kelly on the sort of the people pulling the strings behind the green. And I think that's where, again, if I go back to the whole Song of Ice and Fire prophecy, there's like legit good reason to side with the Targaryens, which I never thought, I would say, right? And I think going into the show, but at the end of the day, it's like, oh, there's a reason why they're desperately trying to hold on to power. You kind of wish they would just tell somebody, but whatever. And I don't know, with the whole green thing, her pops, it just really is beginning that sort of what is it, the wheel, right? They're breaking, just starting the game, and the ladder, right? They're the ones who are really pushing for that ladder to kind of take over, and it's not for any real like big altruistic reason other than to hang on to power,
right?
So I go black. I bet on black.
Okay. Fair enough. A lot of good points there. Kayla, how about two things here? You can tell us green or black, and then let us know whether you think the series. You can finish your thought about whether the series holds up. It's totally fine. That's why we're live.
Yeah. Pretty much. I don't think I can say whether it holds up yet. I loved Game of Thrones so much. I got into it in the third season. I read the books many times, rewatched many times, watched like all the like crazy theories online before the final season, and then was extremely let down by the final season. I still enjoyed it, and I've rewatched it a couple times since the final season. But it was really hard for me to start House of the Dragon because I'm like, I don't want to be let down again. And I think a lot of people were like that too. Mm-hmm. But once I got into it, I felt like it was a very separate thing. And I also just loved all the strong female characters as well. Like there's obviously a lot in Game of Thrones too,
and
but I feel like
boys.
Yes. But I felt like House of the Dragon really just like put them on the forefront of the show, and I really, really enjoy that. But I don't know if I can say whether it holds up to the Game of Thrones legacy or not. I think we'll have to wait until it's all said and done to know for sure. But yes, Team Black all the way. I was always kind of leaning to Rhaenyra's side since the beginning, and like maybe a few episodes in, I'm like, oh, I could see it going either way. And then once that time jump happened at episode 6, and I don't know, I couldn't go to Alicent's side after that. I mean, they're all, like you guys are saying, like they're all awful, but you know, I think it's like the lesser of two evils is Rhaenyra. And yeah, she does have the rightful claim to the throne. And Alicent just misunderstood what Viserys was saying on his deathbed. But, you know, can't change that now.
Well, on that note about like good versus evil, I was explaining to a few of you on this that there isn't a House Stark good guy to anchor yourself to, like there was in Game of Thrones. Or maybe you were Team Daenerys because she had sort of this underdog story, or Jon Snow, who I guess is still part of House Stark, or Tyrion because he's a dwarf trying to prove himself in the world. There isn't that anchor point of the underdog story to cheer for. It's sort of like evil versus evil. Now, one thing I had to do a double take on, and more than a double take, was when I always thought that, okay, Rhaenyra seems like the lesser of two evils, but then she had her first husband, Laenor, killed, using air quotes. And I didn't realize that that was him rowing the boat at the end and escaping to. I didn't realize that when I first watched it, because it was a dark screen and I probably wasn't in the best lighting in my house watching that. And then I was scrolling somewhere, and then there's like, is Laenor still alive and where is he? I'm like, no, they killed him in the fire. Then I went back to watch it. I'm like, oh, she didn't kill him. So she's less evil than Alicent. Okay, so that's when I started to root a little bit more for Team Black. Now, I like the elegance and the plotful nature of the Greens because they're what keep it going. They're kind of like, I mean, both sides are kind of like the Lannisters from the original Game of Thrones. So it's kind of like watching House Lannister versus House Lannister. But the Greens are more House Lannister. And I will say something very interesting about Alicent and her father is that House Hightower is very prominent in House of the Dragon. And a lot of people don't know this. They're actually like an underlord or a vassal to House Tully. So the way it works is, because House Tully was very big in Game of Thrones, right? It just so happens that, you know, while House Hightower answers to House Tully, it was a Hightower lord who became Hand of the King. And that kind of brought House Hightower to the forefront at the Red Keep and at King's Landing, which a lot of people don't understand. Like, I've got questions before about where was House Hightower? Were they extinct by Game of Thrones? Did they die at Dance of the Dragons? I'm like, no, they didn't. They, you know, as far as I know, they didn't die out at all. It's just that they're back to kind of like being just the underlord. I say just, but you know, they've got a pretty nice tower at the Citadel.
Weren't the Hightowers in Game of Thrones? Wasn't that Olenna? Wasn't that she a Hightower? Weren't they the White Rose?
Oh, okay. She might have married
She was Tyrell.
She was Tyrell, but she may have been a Hightower before and then married into the Tyrells.
Oh.
Maybe that's why she was called Olenna. You're right. I'm remembering people call her Olenna Hightower.
Someone said that Alicent is a distant relation to Marjorie Tyrell. So I'm guessing also Olenna.
That's it. Good call. So that's exactly where it is. Okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Okay. Fair enough. That's a great segue over there as to why the Hightowers are in power, right?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, go ahead.
I think it's interesting too to see how all of these houses can kind of change ranks of power and gain power and lose power fairly easily, especially because we don't hear about the Hightowers in Game of Thrones, but they're, you know, front and center in House of the Dragon. So I think that's pretty cool to see that it's not just like a few houses, you know, taking over both of the shows. And we see that fluctuation of power in Game of Thrones as well too over time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's it goes back to the title that they chose, which is always fascinating for me, that Martin sort of chose A Song of Ice and Fire as the title for the series, and then HBO went Game of Thrones, which is this notion of like people fighting over the throne. And so it totally lends itself to this idea of like, oh, here's this family all vying for power. But if I could step back earlier, Kayla, you were mentioning having that sort of like Jon Snow anchor, good character, and then Ken started mentioning, well, yeah, and then there was Daenerys, and then there was, who was the third that you mentioned? Oh, Tyrion.
Or House Stark in general as well. But
right. Yeah. And but the idea was, yeah, I think that's what I was missing in this show, was somebody to root for. And none of those characters is perfect. Back in Game of Thrones, like they're not, but there was enough there for us to kind of latch onto and be like, ooh, I want to know more about this person. They're coming from this position either because they're a bastard, or because, you know, their bodies are different, or they're a, you know, this exiled family. But in this one, we're talking about the king with all the power, his daughter, who's like this really powerful princess who would rather just kind of like read stories on the side. Right. And then who else are we dealing with? Of course, the Hand, and Alicent, who's like, oh, this is her friend, who then kind of finds her way because of her dad into the king's bedroom, and they've got that thing going, and I'm just kind of like, wait, what am I? And then Daemon, like, no thanks, not really feeling these folks. And I think there was that level of that underdog story, or that sort of human piece that I was like, okay, I can root for you. I want to see how you're going to play out in this larger Game of Thrones. But whereas I think for Rhaenyra, it's really, what's her role in retaining this power in this game? Because she kind of already had it. Her family, she was blessed. And now another family's member saying, no, you're not actually blessed. We're blessed. And it was just really, it was challenging for me. And I don't know if that's like the punk rock background in me or what, in terms of just this notion of like, at the end of the day, we're watching a bunch of wealthy, powerful people fighting over being the top dog.
It's a roller coaster.
And I think the last Game of Thrones was that, but it was like, you're going to follow these three characters who everyone like feels like has no place being the top dog, but then they sort of rise up and essentially save humanity in this. And that's where I'm taking. So I just think it starts from a strange place of like, my dad was king. I'm supposed to be
already
queen.
here.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, I spent my time talking to him. And so he likes me. And then we got married and my kids are king. And it's just kind of like,
yeah.
Gee.
I agree. It's hard not to have that underdog, but I'm kind of hoping someone will come out of somewhere, or there'll be other houses that come up in the future. But I think for me, I kind of push past that in House of the Dragon, and I'm just like, I'm here for the drama. I am purely here for the drama and the dragons for sure. That was a key hook for me, because I love that high fantasy stuff.
It was refreshing too in the end to hear them say the name Stark and sending the Raven, no, let's send a dragon, let's find out whose side they're going to be. Or, well, Rhaenyra is, let's remind them whose side they're on. But so that was refreshing. I was like, oh, good, we're going to get the Starks next season.
Which Stark? Which Stark? I'm not sure. And yet, getting to the end there, right? Like, this is out of my my book there, which actually shows this is actually the dragon, not so much battle, but the dragon slaughter at the very end of the of episode 10. There, like, that's Vhagar, and they're showing a smaller size difference compared to in the book compared to what was shown in the TV show.
Yeah.
About one dragon basically biting the other one's neck off. So that's I mean, I'm glad they did this, because I don't know how familiar some of you were with the book that had to do with this particular series. I didn't really read Fire and Blood. I was talking to Kayla yesterday. I mean, the book that I had was this tome here called The World of Ice and Fire, and there's about 10 to 15 pages talking about the Dance of the Dragons. So when I was familiar with the characters to some degree, but I didn't have all the little details in there. I just kind of know what the big events are. So when Rhaenyra sends Viserys to Storm's End, in in the middle of that last episode, I'm like, oh, they're gonna kill them all here. It's gonna happen here. Oh no, they're gonna cliffhanger us, and then they did. Right.
Yeah.
But one thing that they didn't capture from just reading the synopsis in here, because this is all the Targaryen kings, and it talks about the long night and the doom of Valyria. It's such a generalized encyclopedia that the fact that Aemond loses control of his dragon, and by extension as well, Lucerys loses control of his dragon, because you got to bear in mind, Lucerys's dragon Arax attacks the bigger dragon Vhagar, and they're both like, no, stop. They don't capture that in here, right? I mean, maybe they capture it in Fire and Blood, but they didn't capture it in the synopsis of this book. So that was interesting to see that extra layer of character development.
100.
On the whole, sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, just on that, you know, in my way too much time rifling through that book in Costco. That book is written sort of as this sort of text, right? This record. Yes. And I've heard, you know, folks talking about that as sort of like there's this unreliable narrative. And I love that that's built into this universe, because I think to kind of compare it to some of the other, I don't know if it's some of the other, to some high fantasy, right? To Tolkien. I know that I've read interviews of Martin sort of talking about, oh, well, Tolkien was doing this, and I kind of wanted to just smack that, right? And I wanted to switch that up and bring in some reality into that. And there's something going on with the dragons and sort of the magic and mystical part of it that I think is being teased in that scene. And I really appreciate that they took the lead of Martin in sort of naming that book is a subjective history, right? They tried their best to document it, but there was something, there weren't cameras around, right? People didn't have their iPhones to video that fight. And to video kind of like what's going on with these dragons. Because on the one hand, it's really cool to see these dragons. On the other hand, there is this sense from the Targaryens of like, well, we don't know if this one's going to hatch. And we don't know if it's going to listen to us and bond with us. And I like this thing that I'm hearing from folks, that there's something going on with the magic of that has created and brought these dragons to Westeros, that essentially they're there for a purpose, and that purpose isn't being fulfilled, and they're almost being misused and abused, so they're kind of dying out. And then we don't really see them come back until that purpose is sort of realized later at the end of Game of Thrones, which is they're there to kill White Walkers. But once you start fighting for them as weapons of power, and then you get these families fighting with one another, I think we're going to start to see some chaos with these dragons. And I think we're going to start to see them like truly shrink in size and get weak and kind of like get distant from the Targaryens until the Targaryens can get their stuff together.
Whoa.
That's interesting. I've never heard of that theory.
It is.
It makes a lot of sense. I did like the notion that they don't have full control over the dragons, because at the end of the day, they are animals, and have that little bit, I forget which episode it was in, but at the beginning of the season when Viserys had mentioned, like, it's all like an illusion that we have this control over the dragons. And I like how that came into play in the very last episode.
They tied it
biggest
in.
Scene.
Beautiful narration.
Yeah.
It's part of the good acting. So, yeah, and it's true. Like, the history of Westeros is written like the history of man, right? Or history of humans, I should say. People. I should be gender neutral. I always get corrected on that. Is that things are very how reliable are they, right? Like this book here is very much, well, you know, we don't know how reliable it is because the person who told us wasn't there. They heard it through a spy. That actually adds to the beauty of what the series is, right? And an extra layer of depth here between the greens and the blacks, and the whole thing about, can Rhaenyra be queen? She was named as an heir, but they'd set the precedent in the first episode by passing over Queen Rhaenys, right? Like when in the opening scene, where it's Jaehaerys Targaryen who was on the throne in the very opening scene, like decades before the rest of the show happens, right? And for the people who may not know, like in the chat or people who watch this after the fact, Jaehaerys is actually the grandfather of Viserys, right? And he outlived his two sons. And it's because Rhaenys is actually the child of Jaehaerys' elder son. And Viserys is the child of Jaehaerys' younger son. And then the Targaryen line of succession hadn't been fully established yet. So that's why they call that Great Council at the beginning. So the precedent had already been set that a woman cannot sit the throne, because the last time somebody, an older heir was around, they passed her over. And then the person who sort of overrules that is Viserys, the one who was rewarded for the women being passed over. He's the one now saying, okay, now it's okay for a woman to sit the throne. So that is the entire, like, that builds the case for the Greens to say, no, you don't get to overrule history here. You only get to do that if you didn't have a son. I'm not standing up for the Greens, but I'm just saying that the way they've told the narrative lends to a lot of secondary and tertiary arguments, right? So
yeah, and the Hightowers definitely played that to their advantage for sure when they were trying to get everyone to swear fealty to Aegon at the end.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well,
real quick, I just want to name, I think you've laid out their argument, but at the end of the day, it didn't take a bunch of bros with beards to come up with a reason to say no, women can't be in charge. I think at the end of the day, it was there's a ton of misogyny and patriarchy, obviously, sort of embedded in this culture that we're watching,
right?
And that might be like their legalistic kind of claim, but I mean, let's be real. At the end of the day, at least as this world is set up, and to kind of connect to, I think what Martin was vibing on in our world is this notion of like, what does it actually mean to everyone sort of bow down to one person or certain families? And I think that's what he's playing with, right? And I think people are going to find their angle. No, it's because I was named. No, it's because I have the blood. No, it's because, you're a woman and we don't like women. Like, whatever it is, they're going to figure it out and try and rally people on their side to gain power, because that's what they know, right?
They'll find a way, no matter what, make up some excuse.
Yep. And then ultimately dragons is the decider, because it's the nuclear weapons, right?
Oh yeah. Dragon fire. All right. So was there anything, my next question before we go fully open forum here is, was there anything that really surprised you or stood out of the ordinary in this particular series that just kind of was really jarring? Kelly, let's go back to you on this one.
Well, you said we weren't going to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. You go. I'm going for a bathroom break. You do this one.
I don't have any holes in my socks real quick. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Hey.
His name is totally escaping.
Laris.
Laris.
F that guy.
A great actor, but that scene with the feet, that had me like, what is going on? I mean, hey, everybody's allowed to have their own fetish.
Yeah, don't yuck.
Yeah.
Not to yuck anybody else's yum or know
Embrace
anyone
folks'
else's
kinks.
oh. But she's the queen.
Yeah.
And she's allowed
that
information.
She's allowed what? Sorry, one more time.
She's allowing that for the information. That So I think it also says a lot about her, but you see her kind of, she's looking away when it's happening, and she's not happy with either. That was a little shocking to see.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it kind of came out of nowhere. I was like, are they trying to include fetishes in this or something like that? He's just creepy to begin with. And I was trying to think of some of the characters he reminded me of from Game of Thrones, and I totally forgot already. But yeah, I was definitely surprised by that. But at the end of the day, I was like, it's also Game of Thrones. They've thrown a lot of other stuff at us before, so this is just another one.
Yeah. I feel like, is that the tip of the iceberg? Like, are we going to see more with that?
Probably.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think that, they had this whole setup with this really, really young girl and her uncle. And then the thing that stands out, we're like, oh my God, you see that dude with the feet?
But we had brother and sister incest in Game of Thrones.
True.
So
True.
To that.
Yeah.
But they were adults.
Exactly.
But yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
they really try to push it.
I had two kind of thoughts, and I think I almost forgot the second. But the first one is totally random and silly, but real question. How were they doing nylon stockings? Like back in that era? Was that magic?
It looked like a really long sock. I just watched it again. It looked like a really long sock. I don't know if it was nylon or not.
Right. Either way, I'm like, wow, those are some amazing artisans. So I guess it's like lace.
Yeah.
Maybe that's part of the kink. I don't know. And then the second thing is we've already kind of named that this show in particular has really tried to hit on the experiences of women in this world. And that scene was incredibly painful. As you mentioned, Kelly, the sort of this is the queen doing it. But in this world with its misogyny and its ways, even this person who doesn't have a whole lot of power in his family and in this world, sort of can hang on to his power as this dude who's like, this is what I want, and you're going to give it to me regardless of if they're the queen or not. And we see that even earlier. It's set up earlier before the feet come along. Sorry, Ken. With him sort of like, no, we're going to do this. There's only one way, and kind of pushing himself and his agenda and what he's willing to do to kill people, to burn people, and sort of frame it and gaslight her as if no, this was your idea. No, you made me do this.
You wanted
and
it.
then we've so it's some deep layered stuff, and I really appreciate that about this show. So yeah, that scene was really painful. And you mentioned her looking away. I think that was what was especially painful, and I applaud them for sort of showing us that moment, because it was sort of she's there, and then you see her just I can't even look at this, but I'm having to do this right now, and I'm the queen.
Yeah, I'm the queen. This is what I'm subjecting myself to.
Yeah, I saw something online that was talking about how Alicent, because she's never experienced pleasure from Viserys, and so she thinks that this is a form of pleasure in a way. I'm like, maybe, but she's not getting anything out of it. She's getting information, but I'm like, if this is her version of pleasure, I'm like, damn, that's so sad. And yeah, it's same Game of Thrones stuff all over again with putting women in these positions. And I hope they don't get to the level that Game of Thrones did and decide to treat it in the way that they did with I forget her name, something with a D, that Aegon attacked.
Diana.
Oh,
the serving.
Yeah. And not actually showing the act, So I appreciated that, because I'm like, we've seen enough of that in Game of Thrones. We don't need to see any more of that.
Yeah. Way back in the day, it's reminding me of a story now. Way back in the day, it was in my university years. I mentioned Air Jordans one time, and someone thought it would be cool by accusing me of having a foot fetish. And I was like, huh? And then Air Jordans became cool later on. So all these years later, James, I guess the joke is on you. So, get you some Jordan 1s for your some fake Jordan 1s for your birthday or something. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if I still have them on Facebook. I don't know if we're still friends.
Kayla, I know you're big in the memes. Is there a meme out there where they kind of show the setup and then you pan out to her feet and she's got some fly kicks on? And he's staring at her shoes. There's got to be.
No, I'm sure there is, but not when I was looking at memes at the time. I did not see any of those. Lots of other only feet memes and stuff like that, but did not see that, but yeah, sure there are.
Well, Kayla, I'm gonna get to your. I'm thinking Brick got his thoughts in about the one thing that really stood out from this series, or did you? Because I stepped away for a second. Did you manage to get that?
Oh, you know what?
Didn't,
I don't. Yeah, go for it.
I mean, the pacing was obviously different. The time jumps, which I guess they're not doing in future seasons. But once I heard about it, I was pretty much okay with it anyways. Other than that, nothing really stood out too much. It was very, very Game of Thrones-esque world. And I don't know. I think maybe the only thing is when, in episode 5 at the wedding when Kristen killed Joffrey, Kristen killed Joffrey.
Yeah.
How that all played out and the confusion of it. There's definitely similar Game of Thrones scenes that did that, but I felt like this one very much stood out. And then just like the chaos of it, and then Viserys not saying anything after that. It just seemed a little bit off to me. And and that we didn't see the reason. Like, we saw the conversation between Kristen and Joffrey, but we didn't see like what really, prompted him to kill him. But other than that,
it's implied, but yes,
it is. But I don't know. It just seemed a little extreme. And then the fact that Kristen just like got to stick around. I know he tried to kill himself, and then Alicent stopped him. But then killing that dude later on in the council.
It's a knight of the King's. He's a knight of the Kingsguard, though, so
yeah,
that's why he gets away with things. But anyway, let's break up the bad scenes with a caption this moment. So who wants to caption this? Who wants to caption this first?
You step off camera because you don't want to talk about feet, and then we're seeing this.
All I will say is water sports, and that is it. You can look that up on your own time.
Wow. I'm gonna take a pass on that one.
Yep.
Kelly, did your dad ever step into the ring with Rick Rude? That you remember, or did they just miss each other?
I am not sure, actually.
I'm struggling to remember as well. Maybe a Royal Rumble or something. I'm not sure because your dad came back at the end of 1990, and Rude had just finished his feud with the Warrior. So I'm not actually sure. Whether they crossed paths or not. But anyway, I just thought this was appropriate. People always said that this was the most useless LJN wrestling figure ever, and I figured, well, what better than for Tyrion to pass out with a cup in his hand and
this was considered the most useless.
Well, because he just has his hands in his pockets, and I thought, well, from the back, it looks like this, and I thought, well, let's make it useful. Let's make it useful somehow.
I mean, that was his thing, I guess. Yeah, he had a little bit more movement and pizzazz to his rubbing of his thighs.
I guess so.
Ravishing Rick Rude, yeah,
ravishing. So ravishing. All right. I will say that the time jump for me was the most jarring thing because I ran into a situation where I could not tell that was Rhaenyra giving birth in that scene. I'm like, who's this? Who's this? Right? And there's nobody around her that we recognize, right? It's the midwives that are around her, right? So I had no idea until they said her name. That's Rhaenyra, right? Now they changed Alicent's actress, and that was a little less jarring for me because she's more about the green dress and the hair. Right. And the fact they said the queen wants to see you. So that was less jarring for me. But that's where, when I talk about like something that was surprising or jarring, off-putting, that's that level of 10-year time jump. Because, you got to bear in mind the supposed teenage child actress of Rhaenyra she's still an actress in her 20s, right? Mm-hmm. Early 20s, I grant you. So I did not expect them to change actresses, but I guess that as House of the Dragon goes on, it's hard for her to play somebody in her mid, maybe late 30s, right? Mm-hmm. Because the Emma Darcy who takes over the role is not that much older, but older enough that she could sell you on the the mother of multiple children angle, right?
Yeah.
Taller.
Well, that's the other thing. How did she suddenly get taller? Because
magic.
Yeah, because there's a big because I know she's 14 the start of the series, but by the time they do the time jump, before the time jump, she's 17 or 18. So she's gonna be almost as tall as she's gonna be. And then the time jump happens and she grows like, 4 or 5 inches. It's kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway,
I have to push that back. I know a lot of people also mentioned that watching episode 6, they're like, who are these people? I had already known ahead of time who was going to be who from looking up stuff, but I heard that threw quite a few people off, and it was interesting like who they decided to recast, but they didn't recast Kristen Cole or most of the others, which Kristen Cole is just like, does he have the one ring? Does he not age? Because he looks exactly the same. It's like they didn't even try to make him look a little older. And same with Matt Smith too. He pretty much looks the same. They cut his hair, but like that doesn't change how your face looks.
Well, Sir Kristen grew a beard to try to look a bit older, right?
A little bit. But then they cut his hair. They kind of did the same thing as Daemon, where they cut his hair, and I was like, okay.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because if they catch you in that age group where, let's say you're 30 and they need you to play like a 24-year-old version of yourself, and then they need you to play like a 35-year-old version of yourself, it's kind of doable if you're caught between ages. Like, they kind of did it with Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, right? Where he had to play a younger version of himself, and then he had to play a slightly older version of himself with Ewan McGregor, right? Because he was like 29 and he had to play like a 24, 25-year-old. Then he ages a couple years. Then he ages a couple more, and by the time he's 38, he's really only 33 in real life or something. So you can do it to certain degrees. But yes, I noticed that as well. They didn't recast Kristen Cole. And they didn't recast, I don't know how you would recast Matt Smith. He's so darn good at it. Well, mind you, all of them are. The acting is really what carries the series, right? So
that's right.
I think people would have revolted if Matt Smith was recast, because he's so good. He plays it perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
They should have recast him with Peter. What's his name? Or Jody Whittaker. No, sorry, Dr. Who joke. Real quick though, I did see someone. You mentioned. What's going on? You mentioned the time jumps. There was something in the chat too. I was trying to find it, but someone else mentioned that they were rubbing up against the time jumps as well. I don't know.
Yeah, that was my buddy Ethan from.
Gotcha.
That was my buddy Ethan from Speaky Geeky who mentioned that, and that reminded me what I was gonna say. Don't know if he's still here, but
yes. You didn't want to ignore that.
I liked the time jumps. I knew ahead of time, like Kayla did, that they were going to be switching actors, and so I knew that we were losing the young Rhaenyra and getting an older one. So I knew that was happening. So when it happened, I was like, "Oh, there it is." Mm-hmm. So it wasn't as jarring for me. Had I not known, I would have been the same and been like, "Who is this? And what's going on?" And it would have taken me a while to kind of figure it out. But that being said, I enjoyed the time jumps because I'm like, now we don't have this whole episode about what happened in between. Like, I don't need to know what happened in between. You just jump ahead and then you can fill me in later. You know what I mean?
And also, real quick, with Game of Thrones, when they would suddenly be able to travel distances in like a second compared to the second season where it took them ages. Mm-hmm. I feel like that kind of made up for that. I think they learned from that as well with the House.
Yeah. Oh, did we lose you, Kayla?
Oh.
Audio.
No.
Yeah.
No, your audio died, Kayla.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
You're good now. You're good now.
I muted because Larry came over.
I figured it was. I heard the chains. And then
Larry.
Yes.
Yeah. Love that.
Yeah, he's the dog I'm sitting. He's a basset hound.
Do you think there's a version of this though, where, like, again, I hadn't read the book, so I don't know if there were a lot of events that they skipped over, or if that's just sort of the pieces that have been put out there. Is there a version of this where we did get to spend a little bit more time with the different versions and different ages throughout that might have helped address some of the things we brought up earlier in terms of, like, maybe we could root for both sides a little bit more or understand both? Are there things in the lore that I'm not aware of that could have been covered, or anybody know?
As far as the World of Ice and Fire wiki, like this particular book, no, I did not notice that in here. Now this Fire and Blood cover it, because I know Fire and Blood is a couple of stories put together. So I don't think there is. I think the time jump is exactly what they needed to do. Now, mind you, I'm only partially educated in this particular topic. I'm not like absolutely. I didn't get to read Fire and Blood. I was, my brother asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said, you should get me Fire and Blood. And I don't know why he wasn't able to find it, but I don't know if I'd even have time to read it. But I don't think there's a version where they stay, and maybe it would be a little bit boring, right? Because like it's kind of clear not that much happens, right? They do the war at the Stepstones. They welcome Daemon Targaryen back. The story evolves a bit. They wed Laenor to Rhaenyra. Alicent has kids, and then they time jump. Like, not a lot happens in between. So I think that's probably why they did that. But I'm not sure if they missed something in there that they're gonna have to go back in a flashback scene or not. So. Okay. Yeah. Anyway, we're into the open forum now, so it's whatever you folks want to talk about.
I would hope they don't have to flash back. I think if anything might hint to something that has happened, but I hope they don't have to flash back. Because that can get tricky when they do that. Especially because then it's like, why didn't you show that in the first season?
Yeah.
More a little bit and about his death and being in the fire and then seeing him
rowing away. You're talking about Laenor, right?
Yeah. Excuse me. How do we know that Rhaenyra knows that he's still alive?
It was all a plan with Daemon, I thought.
Well, I took it as Daemon going to his lover and being like, I want a quick death, and paying him. And then we never see the conversation between, I'm forgetting his name, but the lover and
Carl.
Yeah, we never see that conversation of like, hey, they want you to die. Like, they want me to kill you off. Like, how do we know that was a deal that Daemon said, you can stay alive, you just have to leave? Because we don't see him say that.
He did want to leave though. Like he says in earlier episodes, like, was it the smart sailor leaves before the storm comes or something like that? He says something to that effect.
Yes. But what I'm saying is, how do we know that Daemon, because to me, when I was watching it, was Daemon getting money to kill him, and he doesn't kill him. And he's off. So do Carl and Laenor form their own deal on the side? Yes.
Like let's escape together.
Hey, they're paying me to kill you, so let's fake your death and get out of here.
Except for Daemon killed the decoy body. So he was definitely in on that part.
Daemon did.
Right before he snaps his neck. So that's why I figured Rhaenyra knows.
Rest in peace to that poor guy.
Yeah, especially when she talks with Rhaenys later on, and she, implies that Rhaenyra had Laenor killed, and she was like, "I loved your son," but you could tell that she wanted to tell Rhaenys your son's alive, but she wanted to protect him. So I thought it was implied, and at least Daemon knew for sure what the whole plan was. So I figured with how open Rhaenyra is with Daemon that he would reciprocate that.
Gotcha.
Wow. I'm processing a lot now because I forgot about the murder. I guess it's the murder on the stairway that Lucha Johnny's mentioning here.
Yeah.
I completely forgot that scene. I'm not sure.
It was very quick.
I was gonna say I must have blinked because I don't really remember that. I will go back and watch it though, but
I didn't see it the first time. I saw it the second time, so it's very quick.
I'll go back and watch because I don't remember that. But but that was when I watched it. I've only seen it once, so that was my takeaway. It was like, they don't even know he's still alive, and now he's leaving, and what if he comes back? And what if that? And
So what do we all think of Aemond One Eye?
Daemon 2.0, but worse. I mean, he definitely looks up to Daemon a lot. You could see that in those scenes together too. He's just admiring him so much, but I feel like he definitely didn't intend to kill Viserys, but you could see that in his face after it happened. And I feel like that moment, though, he's probably just gonna roll with it from now on. He's like, I didn't intend for that to happen, but he's like, it happened, so I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, this is a good comment here. I was curious about can Sea Smoke the dragon? Since we're talking about dragons, can Sea Smoke, Laenor's previous dragon, still bond with another dragon? Does Sea Smoke know Laenor's alive? Right.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. That's quite interesting, right?
I said that's a great question.
It is. Now, I know to me it's kind of obvious that they're going to be setting up Daemon versus Aemond in a later season. They're going to try to set that up as the extra big battle. Daemon is clearly the more experienced warrior, probably the better swordsman. I say probably, even though Aemond can spar 1-to-1 with Kristen Cole and get the best of him. So we'll see. But for real battle, we know it's going to be Daemon. However, Aemond's dragon is bigger, older, more experienced. Right? I'm not saying that Caraxes, the dragon of Daemon, is a slouch by any stretch of the imagination. It's a smaller dragon compared to Aemon's, but Aemond's dragon Vhagar was there at the conquest. Right, that was Visenya Targaryen's dragon. Is the only dragon alive from the conquest, as far as I know. Right, so he's got the dragon. He's the reason why the two sides are evenly matched, because he's got a stronger dragon than everybody else. Right, it's likely he's as equal a dragon rider as Daemon, but with a bigger dragon, if that makes sense. So, because the Blacks have more dragons on their side, but and I don't know why Rhaenyra says it at the end, because when Daemon says, "We have more dragons than they do," and he lists them out, and then Rhaenyra says, "None of our dragons have seen war." I'm like, well, hasn't Daemon's dragon? Wasn't he part of the War of the Stepstones? But I don't know, like, is that more of a big skirmish than a war? Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's a little different than...
Well, especially war between dragons, but then even
Vhagar, did Vhagar fight him as a dragon, right?
I mean,
because I know Vhagar was in a bigger battle with the Conquest. Vhagar was there when all of Westeros was taken over, whereas Caraxes was there the Stepstones battle is significant, but it's a skirmish by comparison to taking over Westeros. I'm not sure why Rhaenyra says that, right? Because I'm sitting there, I'm sure Daemon's dragon has some decent experience, right?
Yeah.
It's a little different, Yeah. So
I feel like that was out of place as well.
Yeah, but I know a lot of the dragons are small, right? Like you saw Lucerys' dragon was, a toddler by comparison, right? So, yeah.
I think this conversation and sort of earlier when you're asking about Aemon, it highlights I think one of my favorite parts of this story is this notion of generations, right? I think we see things being passed on to Rhaenyra and then going to this next generation. There was that moment at that dinner where it seemed like Rhaenyra and Alicent were kind of coming to some kind of resolution and peace in that moment, and they were trying to keep the peace. And there was like this real brief glimpse of like, okay, I think we're okay. Then the king steps out of the room, and then this next generation is like, too late. You all have ruined us. And so we are going to ruin each other, and we're going to snipe after each other and go after each other. And I think, to me, I think that's the beautiful sort of tragedy that we're going to see play out now, because they don't have this larger context of that prophecy. They don't have, they only know what they've been taught. And we've seen that now. And sorry, what's the new king, homeboy who likes to hang out on the ledge?
Aegon
the second, yeah.
We see him sort of start to embrace his power in that moment and kind of get drunk off that moment of being in the crowd and doing that, But that's all they know. For the longest time, he didn't want to be that, and his mom kept saying that you're gonna be the king. You're gonna be the king. And so now we've got all these folks who are playing into the role, these younger generation playing into the roles that they've been provided and dealing with all this sort of generational trauma. And And so I do think that might play into a little bit about what even happens with them and their dragons, right? With them kind of sniping at each other. And like, this is where that family, the dragon family, has come to. And now we're going to have to see them work it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that part is always interesting. So to think about now the uncle going against, is that right? No, yeah, uncle.
The nephew, yeah.
The nephew who kind of is like, oh my God, my uncle is so
They're
cool.
all too related.
I'm looking at him. He looks so good. I like his look. You know, I want to emulate him.
I've adopted his look and added an eye patch.
Yeah, and I'm gonna start acting like him. And now I need to kill him. Like, it's just really, it's tragic.
It's subtle, and I didn't catch it on the first watch. But what sets Aemond off in that 9th episode to give that toast, 9th episode, 8th episode, to give the toast about the strong boys is that they serve.
They put the pig.
They put the pork, the pig in front, and Viserys. They put the pig, lechon. They put the pig in front, and Viserys, who cost Aemond his eye, snickers a bit, and then Aemond's like, okay, that's it. Put the glass down, and these three strong boys. I'm so proud of the family and that thing, and then all of a sudden, then all hell breaks loose.
Yes.
Right.
But it's after the king has sort of said, we are a family. Get over it, y'all. Come together. And then you see this moment of like, oh, yeah, I think maybe we can. Alicent's looking, and they're like, okay, cool. But you're right. He gets triggered. And all that stuff about the family coming together, all this notion of like, we have to come together because our grandfather is potentially dying. The king is dying, just is out the window. And they've essentially been programmed to just destroy each other.
That's 100% it. And it's like Aemond was an underdog in childhood, right? Like he did not get a dragon. He was picked on. When he finally got his moment of glory, it cost him an eye, which is interesting because Queen Helena says he'll have to like the weird queen, she's had to say, oh, he'll have to close an eye. And I missed that on the first watch as well. Right. So, she's important too. We haven't talked about her.
She's amazing.
And like
her prophecies. Whew.
Yeah. And with the like centipede, how the last section didn't have legs. So like Bran didn't have legs.
I didn't even catch that. Sorry. Could you help me educate me on that?
Yeah, when Helena was little and she was talking with Alicent and she's looking at the centipede and she was counting all the legs on it. And then she's like, oh, the last ring doesn't have legs or something like that.
That's Bran, you're saying? Nice.
That's what a lot of people theorize, at least.
Yeah.
Bran, which makes sense. And then there was another one at Lena's funeral where she closes like a spider in a shell. And a lot of people think that might be like Larys, because I think his downfall is the Valerians. And so, they're of the sea. So like the clamshell swallowing the spider, even though his symbol is a beetle, still another insect.
Oh, okay. Yeah. We could just unravel all of her sort of little prophetic.
Oh, and the beast beneath the boards. That was a big one. Which she says twice. I didn't realize she said it twice. She says it once at dinner and then once with Alicent as well. And then it happens.
Yeah, that moment to go to the beast beneath the boards and sort of that hesitation on her part to kill this new king and them all.
Yeah.
Wow. So like that's totally like, oh, this whole thing could have ended really quickly.
Yeah. Which she says at the beginning of the next episode. She says it's not my war to start. And I was like, okay, I guess that's your explanation. But if it was me, I would have just done it there. But, that would have killed the story.
And it's fascinating, though, considering that she was so, at one point in her life, she was like, my place, I know my place, but they denied me my place. So I don't know. I guess it could be said at this point, she's sort of given into everybody else's version of the way things are supposed to go. And she's just kind of gone with it.
Yeah, when Rhaenys was sitting on that dragon and she's in there and I'm yelling at the TV, like, say it, do it, Dracarys,
Yeah, yeah.
I think we all were.
Roll credits.
Yeah.
She walks
That's right.
away. I was
This-
like, what are you doing?
I know.
This reminds me of that third episode in season 8 of Game of Thrones, where the Night King is there in open battle, and Daenerys is on Drogon, hovering above him, right? And pardon my French, I don't normally curse on this channel, but I actually screamed into my screen, Dracarys, motherfucker! And I held that for a good, 10 seconds. And then as Drogon blows the flame onto the Night King, right? I'm like, okay, that's it. It's over. And then I quickly click the time. Oh, 24 minutes left.
Yeah.
This a-hole's still
Not
alive.
over.
Right. And then, of course, then the whole twist with Arya comes along, which I'll go back to that, because a lot of people who say they don't want to watch season 8, those first few episodes and up to that Night King battle is still worth it.
Night.
I don't think it goes downhill till after that point. People just say, oh, I didn't like season 8. First couple episodes were slow. I'm like, but the build up for that battle is must watch TV.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went a little sideways.
But
yes.
You like the
Long Night
season?
was pretty epic.
But it was still good.
Well, Kelly, you're very much team Daenerys, right? Which is why you weren't a big fan of how it ended, right? Like I liked her, but I didn't take to her as much as I did to Jon Snow and his underdog story, which is kind of why.
Same.
Yeah, I loved him too. And then he ended up back on the freaking wall. But
Why
did they even need the wall?
It's like there's still a Night's Watch. Like that's why it didn't make sense to me. I'm like they're just phoning it in. Like that was my problem with the last episode.
They should tear down the wall.
Yes.
Well, yeah, right.
On that note, sorry,
No, go ahead.
but on the note of the wall, will we see the wall?
I feel like at some point we have to.
It's mentioned. I imagine as a dragon, as Jacaerys flies to Winterfell, they'll probably be able to show the wall from overhead. Though mind you,
maybe at like a distance.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I think the wall is still kind
far.
of far. It's still kind of far from Winterfell, right? If it was, yeah. I know one of the castles is close to the wall. I forget what it's called. I think the Last Hearth.
Yeah,
or
there's
something
some other.
Yeah, the Last Hearth
there's
is
a
close to
bunch
the wall.
places.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, because to go back to the sort of prophecy, Rhaenyra knows. To what extent do you think she will share that? And can she share that? Does she have enough information to pass that on to anyone at this point? And so I wonder about that. And of course, we saw Alicent sort of misinterpret the king's sort of, fever dreams, thinking that he was talking to his daughter, sharing the prophecy. So I don't know exactly how much does she understand what he was saying. But I am curious, is someone going to sort of explore, hey, is it possible that something is coming, that winter is something that we should be focusing on? I don't know.
It's too many generations out, right? Because it's like 170 years before like Daenerys, like 170 years from now, like from this point, Daenerys marries Khal Drogo. Forget everything else that happens after that, right?
Yeah.
So like it's a little far away.
But that's for us.
172 at the beginning. She was when Dany was born.
Yes.
And
born.
Then so it's
Not
like
even,
100, like a little less than 150 now at this point. So
yeah, and I think again, I think that's for us as people who are sitting on the outside and kind of have this bigger picture. But for the characters in the show, for all intent and purpose, I'm blanking on the king's name.
Viserys?
Yes, it seems like there's a moment where he doesn't anticipate that it's hundreds of years from now or 100 years from now, because there's a point where he's still waiting for this male heir to come, right? Which I assumed, and please correct me if I'm misreading this, but part of the prophecy was that this heir would get the prince that was promised, right? And so my sense was that there was a moment where he thought that maybe his son might be that. So I don't think in his mind at all, it was like, it's not coming for another 100+ years.
That's
that
true.
It could potentially be coming.
That's true.
In this generation.
He doesn't have hindsight. Like he doesn't. That's a very
Right.
good point. He doesn't have the previous 8 seasons like we did. We're like, well, we know when that war happens. We know when the Song of Ice and Fire kind of hits its fever pitch, right? But you're right.
For him,
he doesn't
it's just
have
this
that
thing that he's assuming is true. So he's waiting for it to happen and basing a lot of his decisions and the life of the kingdom on it. So
I still think he means Rhaenyra's Aegon, though, for sure, because he thinks he's talking to Rhaenyra, and then also earlier calls her his only child. So his mind is clearly going, and so I think that he definitely means Rhaenyra's Aegon versus Alicent's.
Because people forget that like there is an Aegon the Younger, who we see briefly as a toddler, right? Mm-hmm. And yes. Yeah, unfortunately, I already know what happens to him because of this thing that I never thought this. I read this before I knew there was going to be House of the Dragon series. I read this back in 2016. So unfortunately for me, I kind of know how the series is going to end. Now, are there going to be weird little nuggets of information like Laenor being alive, because that's not in here? Do I get every single death? No, I don't know exactly how it's going to happen. So there's still a lot to enjoy coming up. Wow, we've been talking for 75 minutes and the time just went by quick. Like I kind of feel like we've been here for about 30. Anyone else get that way? Like these, I could be here for hours, but then I would savor nothing for next time if that was the case.
You could end it in Game of Thrones fashion and just cut it on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then start a part 2 after the fact. Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we still got a little bit more time, so we're good here to keep going open season on this.
Right. I haven't been paying attention to the chat. Ken, anything that folks are bringing up that you thought we should?
I've been trying to throw them on the screen at the same time, but I'm also trying to get used to the slightly busier chats that I'm like. I still remember when I would go live. I think Kelly and I went live on the first or second time on this channel. There was like 4 people, so I could just pull up every comment and address every single one. Like that's why I don't know how Geek Dad Life or Toy Anxiety are able to manage their chats, because like they're a complete rapid fire, right?
Yeah.
Mine at least still has a start-stop nature to it right now.
One thing I did want to mention was I saw that a lot of Daemon's more emotional scenes were cut, and I wasn't really sure why, but there's one after Laena dies and he's like hugging both of his daughters and consoling them. They cut that. And then there's another scene after Rhaenyra in the last episode gives birth and gives the stillbirth, and so he like goes into the water and like kneels down and starts crying. And so I was just curious if anyone knew why maybe that they cut those, because I feel like that would add so much to his character.
It's got to be time constraints. Like you can expect to see that maybe on the outtakes of the Blu-ray release or something like that, right? Like that's exactly the kind of thing that you would do. So
But it's funny because that's the kind of thing that I find myself longing for, because there's something about Daemon where you're just kind of like, ew. But then there's these moments where you're like, oh, he feels like he was passed over. And so there's this little bit of, he's a little bit sympathetic at times. So then when I sort of saw that moment, I thought that he genuinely had this great relationship with this person, like felt like he'd found an equal or something, at least a partner in crime or something, and thought that he was going to be away from the troubles of the crown with her. And then she dies traumatically giving birth, and she chooses to take her life. And I thought it was odd to not see him interact with the children a little bit more, or sort of like that we didn't get some insight into what he was thinking in that moment. Like, does this drive him to like want to burn the world? Like, what is going on with him? And then he ends up with his niece.
Yeah, there was definitely a bit missing there, but I'm guessing it was just for time. I thought maybe it was just to make him, I don't know, less dimensional and like make people hate him more. But I don't know. I guess just cut for time is probably the reason.
If you take
That's
away
exactly
the
it.
human side from him, where
Uh-huh.
he's getting upset over the loss of his child and of his wife and all of that, well, he loses his wife and child, and then he loses another child with Rhaenyra. So you take away that human element from him, and you're okay hating him still.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess it's just odd though, because I think that's where the show is at. Like, it's not like because we were so in love with all the other characters, you know, like it's an odd choice. I kind of like that complexity in, you know, it was the same with Tyrion, right? Like sometimes you're just like, oh my God, you're disgusting, and then the other times you're like, oh my God, you're amazing.
Yeah,
and I would love a little bit of that back and forth with some of these characters.
Well, that's just it, right? Like the characters are so similar aesthetically, costume wise, setting wise, and they couldn't be more different than what we're used to in Game of Thrones, right?
Very true.
So, yeah. Sorry, I'm just gonna ban these spammers in the chat. I've apparently got someone trying to. I've apparently got the spammers here. Unless Gaz, did you get them already, or do I have to block them?
What do you think production wise? I'm curious because you've got a different creative team running this. How are folks feeling about sort of the meta of this as a series versus Benioff and Weiss's series? I
think they've learned a lot for sure. They have that benefit going for them. Stylistically, very similar.
Yeah.
Obviously have the same composer as well. Love the music.
Same theme song.
I don't know. I feel like, I feel like it's hard, once again, hard to say until we see more of the show, but it's very similar. There are like certain things, like I feel like in Game of Thrones, the little subtleties, like Easter eggs and stuff that's happening was a lot of times more in the background of the shots, whereas all of it seemed to be very obvious and in the foreground of House of the Dragon. But it also could have been because, you know, it was like doing so much in a short amount of time and all the time hops and everything. So that could have been part of it and may get back to that in next season. So, but I do kind of miss that a little bit, where you like really have to look and analyze to find these things. Whereas now it seems a little more obvious.
Well, there was one episode I pretty much just like listened to. I like couldn't see anything. It was so dark.
Oh yeah. They took that from the long night, that's for sure.
Yeah. Like, what? You know, I'm watching on my phone, so I'm like, what is going on?
Oh
I'm
no.
Reflection off. I'm like, this is awful.
I actually found, weirdly enough, well, because I think the first time I watched it, I was dog sitting somewhere else and I couldn't change the settings on the TV because I did that for the long night. But when I watched it on my computer, it was easier to see for whatever reason. So I don't know.
Well, I cannot see anything on my phone.
Yeah. No.
You're like me. You watch on your phone when everyone else goes to bed. You're just kind of like, I'll just watch like this.
Yeah.
You know, pretty much from like the 5th season of Game of Thrones onwards, I just watched from my phone. So just the way it was when my kid was born during the 5th season. So I was kind of like, yeah, you know, I'm gonna have to do it that way.
Yeah.
Improv a little bit, right? I do like that they kept the same theme song, and I do also
open with the seeing where everything is and the buildings.
It's different but the same because they do the blood flow more. And
it's cool how they change it each time as well.
They do. Now the showrunners, in a way, they have a legacy to live up to with Benioff and Weiss, but they also have to try not to make the same mistakes towards the end. So you know, I'm seeing a question in the chat here. Let me just read it right now. Due to the timing of the shows, it's almost impossible not to compare Rings of Power and House of the Dragon. Someone said Rings of Power is a slow burn. Dragon is more scandalous and intriguing. Thoughts? Kayla, I tried to get you to boost my interest in Rings of Power, and eventually I just waved the white flag, threw the towel in, tapped the mat in submission. Any analogy in the world, I didn't get past the 6th episode.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. It's It's very different. I feel like you're comparing apples and oranges, and also if you're used to Peter Jackson's movies, they are very different stylistically, but overall very visually stunning. And obviously they made quite a few changes to the text and condensed and, you know, switched some storylines around and had to escalate things more quickly. But I do think the timing for sure of the Rings of Power and House of the Dragon coming out at the same time probably really hurt Rings of Power. And also I've told a lot of people, like, you don't necessarily need to do background work for Rings of Power, but it's good to do that anyways. Just don't dive too deep into it, because they only had the rights to The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, so they didn't have the Silmarillion or any of the other texts that Tolkien wrote. So it's hard to go into it without that background knowledge.
Is Rings of Power not glomming a little bit off of Silmarillion, though?
It is.
It is, right? Because I have
and
the
there's
Silmarillion.
Been a couple. There's been a couple things that they have said that aren't in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit, and I think they had to get like special rights for those certain words.
Silmarillion's a hard read.
It's a history book.
Yeah, but the thing is,
book.
This is a history book, and it is so entertaining. You don't want to put it down, right?
Yeah, it's just sentence after sentence.
That's just it. I kind of feel that this is the Silmarillion of the Martin universe. And the Silmarillion, I was like, oh, let's study.
Yeah.
There's no exam. Screw it. This one is like, all right, I got some free time. Let's go. All right. So to me, it was hard to go back to. I mean, I love Lord of the Rings. You know, I did a top 10 mentors countdown list that I reshared yesterday. Gandalf is on the list. I'll always love Lord of the Rings. I just think that when it came to this high fantasy genre, Game of Thrones added a higher level of, you know, political but dramatized storytelling that didn't just lean on the archetype of good versus evil, because good versus evil was a bit more subjective, and it's even more gray, and the lines are even more blurred in House of the Dragon. So
I did love Rings of Power, but yeah, like I said, it's apples and oranges comparing them, because yes, I do love the political drama of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, and I feel like that that's not what Tolkien is. And I feel like if they tried to do that, because a lot of people are like, oh, why didn't they try to make it like Game of Thrones? It would have ruined it. And you know, it's already distanced itself from the text a bit, and I think if they try to do that, it really would have pushed Tolkien fans like off the edge for sure. But I liked what they did with it overall.
It's always the most hardcore fans that are the most vocal, right? Because like, what did they say when Lord of the Rings came out? Oh, they cut out Tom Bombadil. I'm like, do you really think Tom Bombadil would cater well to a cinematic audience?
Which I forget. His son Christopher, I think, said, or someone, it was either him or another Tolkien scholar, was like, it would not have worked anyways. And I'm like, yeah, it would not have. And you know, he didn't really add too much, and you can, you know, have other characters play, you know, certain roles that he might have helped with. But yeah, you're going to be very critical of it. But overall, Lord of the Rings was a lot closer to the text than Rings of Power has been so far. But they're also trying to put in a lot in 50 episodes and or 50 hours. And I understand, you know, trying to also have these characters that you're going to want to stick with the whole time. So introducing them sooner rather than later, that kind of thing. Whereas, you know, House of the Dragon is like, you have one episode with this character. That is it.
Look at Harwin Strong. We barely got to know him, and he was gone.
Yep.
Right.
We get to know his kids, though.
I am absolutely. I love Rings of Power, and I think if forced to choose, I definitely would spend more time in rewatching for where I'm at Rings of Power. And I think, and I actually don't know. I don't know how each has been received. I don't pay a lot of attention to sort of what's out there. I don't know if folks have been intentionally kind of comparing them, but it's interesting because again, like, George Martin was very much like knew Tolkien's work and was like big into high fantasy and yeah, I mean he does fantasy, but it's exactly what you said. Like if Tolkien is more sort of in this idealist kind of like mystical realm, Martin wants to play in that world, but then bring it to the material, right? And like bring it into our real world and figure out the realities of it. And so it is hard to compare them. And in this moment when I was watching Rings of Power, for me, it was just a lot more fun. And they definitely, it's kind of almost eye-rolly, and I get it for some folks because it's very much the sort of there's a lot of the mystery box kind of thing happening in that show. And I'm really careful not to spoil anything, but there are some big things in there that do pay off. And I think if I'm looking at Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, it's like I hear people like, yeah, we don't need that, we don't do that. But actually, if you watch Game of Thrones, like it started with this giant mystery in the snow, and that you're trying to sort of figure out. And I really enjoyed that piece, and I feel like that was missing a little bit for me in House of the Dragon. And that's a tiny thing, but as far as like Rings of Power, I really appreciate some of the liberties they have taken with the lore, especially since there's different versions of it, right? I mean, like people absolutely love Tolkien's writing. People love Bakshi's cartoon. But at the end of the day, there's a whole set of folks who only know and really love Peter Jackson's take on things. Yep. And so they had to kind of balance these things in this.
Which they definitely did, because a lot of their callbacks. So like Jackson did a lot of callbacks to the text with, specific quotes and lines, whereas Rings of Power did callbacks to Jackson's films. Which I really appreciated because that's how I first fell in love with Tolkien. But yeah, I think it's interesting because that got me with Game of Thrones too, is, the wall and that high fantasy and the White Walkers and everything. And then I was so sad. I think that was my biggest thing at the end. It was just like over so quickly with Arya. All of a sudden, I mean, I liked how they did that. But I was like, I wanted more out of that mystery and world. And fantasy and everything. And I definitely really like that in Rings of Power. So
I didn't get far enough to be able to really weigh in on it, but some people in the chat are talking about
2 more episodes.
I know, but still. See, I'm with you on that.
There was also like Andor is out at the same time, and She-Hulk. So like a lot of good shows all out at the same time.
I know. It's hard to find time for it all, right? Like some people in the chat are saying, Rings of Power is more Mythic Legions-esque. And I get that. There's just, I don't know what it was. The story didn't hook me. Maybe we're so spoiled right now with quick action and hook in that you're not a slow burn is one thing when they've hooked you in and it's going somewhere. When you're not sure where it's going because they're slow burning you in multiple different directions. Like Galadriel's actress is fantastic. I like her adventures, but then they veer so much from that storyline, and it's hard to keep up. And I was like, you know what, my brain's already tired from other things. I don't want to work. I don't want to give it a workout right now.
See, I love that. I love shows that make you do that. The first show that did that was Lost. Lost got me hooked into it.
Well, that's how you bonded with the initial GDL community. Was Lost.
I was listening to Jay's podcast that he did on Lost back in 2005. But yeah, I loved that intrigue, and you want to look through all these theories and talk about it with all these other people and try to figure out. And then especially with Tolkien's work, like there's so much rich lore and history. And so it just makes me, I already know a lot about it, but it makes me want to go back into it even more. And then on top of that, something I meant to mention before was that like with the Silmarillion, because it's just basically a history textbook, we don't have all that little dialogue and smaller events that happen or other groups of people. Like we have the Harfoots, but they were could have been there at the time, we don't know for sure. So them kind of rounding out that world more, I really appreciate and like a lot. But you know, they don't know exactly what happened. We just know like the events, this happened at this time. But whereas with Lord of the Rings and Hobbit, like you have that dialogue, you have all the specific description, you know, 10 pages on a tree description of things, whereas
it's a bit much though. Your mileage is going to vary on that, though, right? Like I struggled a bit when you see, like you like it because it's different, right? You're absorbing every last detail, right? At some point, a person goes, move on with the story, right? And that's the difference, right? And it's hard because like I'll have these conversations with people, and they're like, you just don't appreciate certain things. I'm like, I appreciate it. There's so much competing for our time right now that if I got to spend X number of pages on a tree, like in 2004, I would have done that. That's when I read Lord of the Rings books. So,
our what's the word? Our time
attention span
has been greatly reduced.
Oh, for sure.
Unfortunately. But
I mean, on that note, though, I will say it's just an amazing time. And I've said this in different spaces. It's just so great to be a nerd right now. I was born in 1976, y'all. I'm old, but I grew up on this stuff, whether it was, you know, Star Wars or Tolkien or the Hobbit cartoons. And right now, it's a nice problem to be able to like, Rings of Power or House of the Dragon or She-Hulk or Andor. Yes,
100%.
Yes, or like a million and one channels like this of people talking about that stuff. Yes.
Yes.
And I think there's another topic in there. Is the nerd now the cool person? We talked about this, Kayla. Like, has the tide turned? You know, is it no longer cool to be a jock? Is it no longer cool to be that? It's
cool to be passionate about things and want to know more about things and learn about things.
There you go.
Yeah. That's what nerds are. Doesn't matter what you're a nerd about. It could be about science, math, like video games, toys, you know, it's all our little specialties.
And I was half venting to Kayla when we did our StreamYard trial the other day. I was kind of like, some of these so-called cool guys, when I would watch UFC with them, when I was really into it, I'd be sitting there, I'd be like, yeah, you know, styles make fights. This guy's got the really great ground game, but he's got to get it to the ground. This guy's got a really great striking game, but he has to avoid the takedowns. How do you think this match is going to play out? And the supposed jock cool guy next to him is like, oh no, I just want to see big men fight. You're missing the point of the big title fight here, buddy. You know, like, I'm really excited about how this is going to play out. Oh no, give me another beer. I want to see some knockouts. I'm like, and you're the cool one, but you know nothing about the actual, you know, like, we're not talking, you know, Dungeons and Dragons and comic books here. We're literally talking about fights. This is supposed to be your realm, and I know more.
In fairness, I think they would have told you can't know. You're missing the point.
Yeah,
that's true. They
would
drink more beer.
Own.
Check it out.
You know, everyone can watch it for their own reasons. Like, there's the sports people that, like me, I just enjoy watching and I enjoyed playing sports. And then there's the people that know every single little statistic of everyone that's ever played. And I find that so fascinating, but I don't go looking for that information. I just love the game itself.
That's fair. And, you know, a lot of people will watch casually. They'll go to Super Bowl parties without really being a football fan. I think it's more the bandwagon because it's cool nature that kind of got me a little bit. I'm just like, I shouldn't be sitting here. I shouldn't be sitting here next to you. Can I move to another table? You know what I mean? Next thing you know, I'm shaking, you know, $10 bets. All right, I got this guy. You got that guy.
But it's also cool in a way that, you know, people that you're both looking at it from two different perspectives can come together and enjoy it at the same time. And that's why I love all these nerd communities so much, is because, you know, it unites all of us. Like, we're all such different people, and it's great to be different and have all these different characteristics about ourselves. But at the end of the day, we're all human, and we all are similar in a lot more ways than we like to admit. And I like that unity that it brings to us in all of these communities.
Love that, Kayla, because I think at the end of the day, when a lot of the sort of like these geeky stories that I was into, or even like science fiction, that was really part of the goal, was to talk about what it means to be human and dealing with real things in our real world, but put it into this fantastic setting. So it kind of like lulls us in and kind of confuses us. So we're just like watching the story, but at the end of the day, we're like, oh, okay, yeah, I learned something about myself. I learned something about other people. And I think to bring it back to House of the Dragon, right, that's really, to go back to some of the points that were made earlier, like it's about power and state. It's about families. It's about generational trauma. It's about the interactions of men and women and people, like, you know, and so at the end of the day, I'm actually really excited that what we would traditionally call sort of geeky fiction and literature and entertainment has become so prominent in pop culture and culture. Because I think it's creating a lot of really cool conversations and moments for folks who never geeked out on these things before.
Yeah.
To kind of all of a sudden engage, like be like, oh, I get it. Like I've had people come and be like, oh wait, this is what you were into as a kid. I was like, yeah, well, it's different now, but yeah, this is the stuff. And I think, I don't know, I think there's a lot more that openness, I think, has created a really cool opportunity. And I fully embrace folks, more folks coming to the table, because Game of Thrones really is like one of the biggest shows. As you started this show off today, Ken, with this sort of water cooler talk, I don't know about you, but the people that I ended up talking with Game of Thrones were not necessarily people I would have imagined would have gone like as deep into a TV show.
Oh yeah.
And there's something really cool about that, I think.
You want to do the research and put in the work to, because they hook you, and that there's this whole other world behind what you see on screen. There's this whole other history, right, that you don't get to see because they can only capture so much of it on camera.
Yep.
But speaking of camera, we're kind of getting towards the end of our my initially allotted time. We can go for another couple minutes if you folks want to. But if anybody has any sort of final remarks with regards to this subject matter, now's the time.
I really enjoyed it. I liked the ride. I liked being back in that world again. I very quickly within the first episode was like, okay, I've already not forgotten, but like I'll go past what happened at the end of Game of Thrones and just see what happens and go along for the ride. And like I said before, freaking love the dragon, so I'm here for it. It'll be interesting, and it'll also be interesting to see what happens without the time jumps and how they work with that, and if they can do as good of a job with it as they did with the first season.
Oh, we're a long way from the second season. It's just
I know
right now. Like I at least had this.
Same with Rings too. It's gonna be a ways.
Well, I at least had this to look forward to with the season ending, and now I'm kind of like, now what are we gonna do for the next? It's gonna be almost 18 months, something like that.
Wow.
Or about 18 months. Like it's 2024 when it comes out, and I'm not
probably
convinced
gonna be close to a year, I'm guessing, or 2 years, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, like when we say 2024, I don't think it's January of 24. Okay. All right. Well, anyway,
probably not.
I think there's plenty to keep us busy as we sort of started closing towards the end. There's so many things out right now. There's going to be how many Marvel movies? Probably.
Oh, the Witcher spinoff, and then
Sure.
the next season of The Witcher after. In the summertime as well.
There's some great animated stuff. Dragon Prince, if you're looking for fantasy. There's just so much. So
I'm waiting for the next season of Black Mirror. That's my Christmas movie every year, is Black Mirror White Christmas.
Except for now, it's just there's some things that are too close to reality. Like I was like, did you watch Black Mirror? Why are we doing these things? Did you see what happened?
I know. It's funny. You just typed in the chat, Kayla, that the Larry is trying to get my attention. I thought you typed Laris for a second, as in Laris Strong, and I was like, oh my goodness.
No. He's currently whining at me.
Kelly, you got any final closing remarks, Kelly?
I mean, I thoroughly enjoy the series, or the season, I should say. I'm looking forward to the next one. I had no idea it was going to be 2024. I knew it would be a ways out, but it's a long ways out. I'll just rewatch.
You can only rewatch so much before that happens, right? And I can only gloss through the pages of this, but whatever. Maybe I'll make some Transformers videos in the meantime or something like that.
maybe they'll surprise us with the final book of A Song of Ice and Fire.
That would.
I think he needs to do a couple more.
Right. I was being hopeful. I was trying to end on a positive note.
And I think that definitely, I mean, even though he told them where it was going, I think it did affect things for sure because, all the little nuanced things that were happening in seasons 1 through 5 of Game of Thrones, felt like they, tried to do those things still after that, but it was really hard to without the text to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, 100%. All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end this on. This went so fast. I think maybe because I talk toys every week. I don't talk TV every week. And now it's kind of like, how are we already at an hour, 45 minutes? I feel like I just turned the camera on. Like it just...
Time flies when you're having fun.
A little too much. So it's only like 10:45 in the morning here on the West Coast. So there's still a whole day left to go. So my dear friends have been telling me to take a rest. They know I probably just want to turn the camera on later in the day and just go live again. They're like, just try resting for a little bit. Like it's okay not to put out content, Ken. So, but I had so much fun with this. A lot of people are, they enjoyed hearing your thoughts. Jordan from Canada, always very positive things to say on
thanks
this.
for having us.
No problem. No problem.
This was great, Ken.
You broke my streaming virginity. Or popped my streaming virginity.
Nobody edit that and take out the word streaming. Please do not. No. I don't think I have enough haters out there that are going to edit that. That are going to edit that out. But mind you, there's a few things we can edit out in this particular thing, such as Rick Rude taking a leak on Tyrion Lannister. Which, by the way, I posted that on Instagram anyway. So I say we're not going to go inappropriate with weird foot fetish scenes, and I go on about this and Hot D and all this other weird stuff.
Also, I'm here, so.
Yeah,
I have the mind of a 12-year-old boy, as I like to say.
I always say I do as well. I mean,
in a different way.
Yeah, in a very different way. Though I think Mythic Legions is probably age 14 and up. So I'll say I have the mind of a 14-year-old boy. Is that right? I have no idea. I think that's a good. This is a good way to end the stream, and we'll we'll see you all again very soon on this channel. That includes everybody in the chat. But subscribe to the channels and give follows to the Instagrams accounts that I put on here. And with that, adios for now, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.